welcome. Whoa, don't want to stand there. All right, welcome to the sessions after lunch. Did everybody here had a good lunch here? Yeah? Yeah, good. Hopefully people are not feeling too sleepy, because that's usually what happens with me. When I eat too much in lunch, I'm ready to doze off for a little bit in the afternoon. But I'll try to keep it uptight. Effectively, we'll be doing a bit of introduction to Firebase and then doing some live demo. So hopefully that's going to keep you guys awake. So just before we kick off, I'm curious to know, in this audience here, how many of you guys are actually using Angular as a day-to-day work thing or a side thing? How many of you guys? All right. Cool. That's awesome, because effectively this is a beginner talk. So this is going to be like a little bit an introduction to Angular, but not really. I'll be skimming through some concepts. So it'd be good to see how do you actually go around building it. How many people here have actually used or heard of Firebase? Yeah, about 50%. Not bad. Yeah. So I'll do an introduction to Firebase as well. It's really interesting. These both technologies are created by Google, and effectively this is something that we've been using them for the purpose of development apps and websites essentially. So let's kick it off. So I'll be doing a live demo, and this is the URL to the code base. And in case anybody wants to download the code base and go through the code on their own end, you guys can do that. I've already pushed the code for the final version, the version that we'll complete today and ship, in case you guys want to have a look on your own computers. So a little about me. My name is Mashhood, and I am, by profession, a full-stack JavaScript developer. I'm the founder and technical lead at Recursion, which is a startup consultancy. We effectively help startups build prototypes and MVPs. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. I'm also a fairly active community member. I'm actually based in Karachi, Pakistan. And the two local communities over there are Angular Pakistan and GDG Karachi. Just last weekend, we had the Dev Fest over there, which had about 600 people, so that was pretty exciting. So that's a bit about me. So at Recursion, like I mentioned, we're a startup consultancy. So we are working with different people implementing their ideas into products, essentially. And these can be something that can be very simple or something that can be slightly advanced. But effectively, every product has to start off with a prototype. And just so I can get an idea, how many people here know what lean startup is? There's lean startup methodology. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah, not many people. So effectively, the lean startup methodology is a way to build products. And this is something that we've adopted as core of our organization. So the idea is that whenever you're building something, if you want, let's say I want a Uber for pizza, I'm going to make certain assumptions about my product before I start building it. Now, the idea is that you test your assumptions one by creating small experiments. Now, in one case, it could be just a static landing page with a sign-up form just to see how many people come in and sign up. And that will essentially give me some idea that, all right, people are interested in this. People are willing to give their information in order to get more information about this product. So similar to that, when you come into application development, there are also certain, it doesn't have to be a new product. It could be an existing product, and you're thinking of adding a new feature. It could be a very big feature, but you want just do part of that. So effectively, the second part is build, and it's all about experiments. And that's where our company usually comes in. So people have all of these ideas. We build experiments for them, and then we measure those experiments. So this is the most critical part. So once we've made an application or a feature of the application, then we go around and we effectively see how many people are using it, how they're using it, and if this actually makes sense to carry on. Now, the tricky part here is that when you're making certain features, especially if it's an application already live, it may need a service that's reliable on the back end, right? So you can't just create a prototype for a feature and ship it out, and if it breaks, then it kind of ruins the experience. So you need something that's stable out there, and for that, we've been working with different technologies. So effectively, before we switched to Firebase, we were doing development like everybody else, literally. We used to have a backend using Node.js where we'd clone we would create a scaffolding, and then we would set up our APIs, and then we would write some tests. Then we would set up our server, the database, the ORMs, and something as simple as just deploying the code could take several hours. So what we needed was something that was a lot faster, so that instead of spending all of that time setting up servers and databases, we could just work on the feature itself and ship it to production really fast and see what people are doing it so that we could measure it again and again. And that's when that's where Firebase comes in. So Firebase is a backend as a service that's created by Google. And effectively, what it does is, so how many people here have heard of Parse? There was this company called Parse that came out. Facebook bought them and then shut them down. That was a slight of a horror story for some people. But effectively, they used to do something similar. But effectively, Firebase is like the next version for Parse. And the idea was that you have this backend where you don't have to do any work at all. You just go ahead, create an account, and then use their SDK. And SDKs are available for iOS, Android, and the web. And you can just start making applications. You can start creating data in their databases. You can start uploading files. You can start using their APIs for other nice things that are available. So effectively, Firebase is Google's mobile platform. So effectively, the main people they initially started targeting were the game developers, right? So as a game developer, I don't want to learn all the backend technologies just so that I can create features like messaging or saving my game scores on the cloud and stuff like that. So what Google went ahead and did was they created this stack of features that you can use, and effectively from everything from signing up to authentication to cloud storage can now be handled by Firebase, and all you have to do is use the SDK in your Android. You don't need to know anything about the web technology itself. And most of these features, as you'll see in the demo today, are just one-liners, right? I just do one line and I can log in. I just need to write one-line code and I can sign up. So they've made it really simple, and it's super powerful, the SDK. One of the things I like about Firebase is that you don't have to use everything. And this is where it becomes really useful when it comes to experimentation. So if I wanted to create an app where I just wanted to use their real-time database or their cloud Firestore, I could do that. And I don't need to use their authentication or anything else. So all of these modules are separate, and I can use any one of them or all of them at once, and it doesn't matter. So this thing is something that makes Firebase very powerful. So out of all those features, we'll be using these three features today. And the first one is our cloud storage. And all of these features before and these ones are actually powered by Google Cloud Platform, which means that these things scale quite a bit. So these are very reliable services, and they're based on Google Cloud Platform. So for example, if I'm talking about Google Cloud Storage, if I'm creating like a demo for uploading videos, and I've deployed that on cloud storage. Now, I don't have to worry about running out of storage space because cloud storage scales up to petabytes. And I don't have to do anything for that. I don't have to go up and change my server configuration or anything. I just start throwing data in there, and it just starts storing it for me. Similarly, with authentication and Cloud Firestore, they're, again, based on technologies that are already running in GCP. So they're very reliable, and they scale very well as well. My favorite part of the Firebase is its SDK. So effectively, the SDK is designed to work on all devices. So we've already talked about iOS, Android, and the web. But effectively, it caters to the cool part about the SDK is that it's not just about connecting it to the back end, but it also provides many other functionalities built in. And one of my favorite functionality is its ability to support offline usage. So this is one feature that is getting increasingly more and more common to add in your mobile phones, or the web for that matter. And Firebase SDK just comes natively with that. And you don't have to worry about syncing your data or overriding records. That's all handled by the Firebase SDK. So this is one of the more powerful things about Firebase. So this was a very quick overview on what Firebase is. Firebase has really good documentation in case you guys are interested in using it. And I'll let you guys check that out online. But what I wanted to show today is how do we use these two tools, Angular and Firebase, and how can we actually start building something really, really fast. So this is what I'm planning to build today. So this is Twitter. It's going to be a Twitter clone. And effectively, I've listed down all these features that I'm interested in creating. Now, before, if I wanted to create all these features, now obviously we're not looking for a perfect product, but we're looking for something that I can push out to production, and then I can start getting users on, and it's functional. People can start using it. So, and I want to build and deploy this in 40 minutes. So how many people here feel that this is something that's possible in 40 minutes at the moment? All right. Nobody? Awesome. Cool. So let's give it a shot and see what happens. OK. Just going to move it a bit closer. Cool. So I've started off with a repository. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Awesome. So the reason I've started off with the repository is two things. One, I didn't want to run npm install on my computer. That usually takes forever when you're building applications. People who work with front end probably know that. The second one is that I wanted to have some basic HTML and CSS done before kicking off, because that's usually the boring part. So this is what I have, is a scaffolding from a tool called Angular CLI. Now, if I just go into my console, and so effectively, Angular CLI generates scaffolding for me. I can install this Angular CLI on my computer just using npm and @Angular CLI latest. This will install my Angular tool for me. And then I can just do ng new. And I can then provide different features that I want in this application. I can say I want to use the SCSS as the styling preprocessor. I want to enable routing in my application. And it will just generate this scaffolding for me. It just takes like a few seconds. So once you have here, I've changed 3 things in this project, which I'll point out. The first thing I've done is I've added Bootstrap so that I have some basic styling for this application. And then I've had some additional CSS just to make things look a bit nicer. And the final thing is this one component I've just dumped in HTML. This is just static HTML, nothing else. And this looks something like this right now. So effectively, I have a sign up and login component that I'm going to use. I have the create suite component, and then I have my list of suites that are going to be fetched from the database. Nothing works right now. This is all just static. So I can now go ahead and start creating this application, right? So the first thing I want to split my HTML into 2 separate components. And components are essentially each component is part of a view that we can control independently from the side. So in Angular, I can use the Angular CLI to generate components. So this, again, saves me a lot of time while I'm building the product. So I'm going to use the ng generate component. And I'm going to say I need the authentication component. And it takes like 2 seconds, and it generates the files for me. I can do the same thing, and I can generate another component for my Zwitter that will actually have all the other functionality that I want in my application. Right? So now on this side, on the sidebar, you can already see it's generated all these files for me that are part of my component. It's wired them up in my application. I need to wire them up in my app module and stuff. It's all been done. Effectively, I can start using these modules right away. So the first thing I'd want to do is I'd want to move my code from this generic component that I have into the specific components that I've created for them. So let's quickly do that. So I'm going to move this into auth. And I just want to close the div. And whoops. So all that's left in the app component is the router outlet. And the router outlet is used by the Angular router. And that effectively is going to show the page that is currently in the view. So according to the URL, it's going to show us the right page here. So now we've moved both of these things into their respective components. I need to also move the CSS file. And there we go. So now effectively, I have these two components and nothing in my app component. So if I go back here, and I should have this running, I'm going to get a blank view because I don't have any routes configured at the moment, right? I've just moved everything from the base component. So let me just go and quickly configure the routes. And that's, again, super easy. I just need to create two objects. And I have to define the paths and their components in it. So component, this is going to be the auth component. And this is going to be the Zwitter component. So I have two views. And this effectively. So now I have two basic views. I have a login view, and I have a Zwitter view that has everything else. I'm missing one thing in my Zwitter component that I need to take from my app component, and that's this array. So that actually I can see the items because they're actually being looped on this. Right? Cool. So if I save this, this is going to reload, and I can see my items again. Everything's still static. I haven't configured anything. There's not linked to any database. So now the next part is I need to start wiring this up to Firebase. Right? And this is like one of my favorite parts because it's just so easy. So first thing I want to do is I want to include the Firebase and the AngularFire 2 libraries. So the Firebase library is the SDK that's given by Google. And the AngularFire 2 is a wrapper around that helps us use that in Angular 2. So we can let this install. And while this is happening, we can go ahead and start configuring this. So I've gone ahead and created a project on Firebase. And this is how the Firebase console looks like. So you have all these features on the side. And right now, we're setting it up for the web. So I just click on this, and I get this configuration. So I can just select this, and I can put it over here. Cool. So that's part one. Now I need to link the libraries into my application itself. So I'm going to come up here, and I need to include this in my app module, right? So my module is effectively it's defining all the libraries and all the different things that I'm using in my application. So over here, I can do this one. So I've imported all my different libraries that I want here. So I've imported the forms module that I'll need for my login form. I've imported my environment variables that coming from the environment file. And for Firebase, I'm using the two things. I'm using the Firestore and auth, and that's what I've included here. And over here, I'm going to configure these modules. So effectively, I'm just mentioning these as imports into my Angular application, and that's pretty much it. So I've configured Firebase into my Angular application, and now I can start using it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start implementing the authentication, because that's the first part. So this is the HTML for my authentication. I'm going to first set up all the Angular bindings on the view. And for that, I will simply start with the form itself. And I'll create a reference variable called form in my HTML. And I'm going to assign it to a Angular directive. So this is a special piece of code that effectively will give this form additional functionality. And over here, I'm also using a different directive called ngModel that effectively binds these fields to this form. So what happens is when I send over here the form.value, which I will, let me just write that first. So I'm going to call login form.value. This form.value is going to be an object that will contain email and password, which are going from the view, right? So this is how I'm going to send data from my view to my controller. And I'm going to do the same for signup. So these functions don't exist yet, and we'll go and add them up next. So that's pretty much all I have to do on my HTML side. Now I'm going to go into my auth component, which is at the moment empty, doesn't have anything. And I'm going to start importing a few things. I'll need the router so that I can redirect to the Twitter component when I'm logged in. Or if I'm logged in, I automatically redirect. I don't need the Firestore here. I can move that. I'm using the auth so I can log in and sign up. And I've imported the rest of the variables because I'll be using them within my implementation. So over here, I'm just going to include the router and the auth. And so over here, what I want to do is I want to check if I'm already logged in, then I should be redirected to the Twitter component. And for that, I will just subscribe to the auth state. So one of the cool things about Angular is that it's using something called RxJS. And RxJS has something called observables. And observables are essentially, it creates a variable which gives you a stream of events, stream of outputs. And in this particular case, we're going to subscribe to an observable which is linked to the auth state. So whenever the auth state changes, this function that we tie to it will get called, and then it can do something. And in our case, we want to redirect it to the Twitter component. So we're going to do this.auth.authState.subscribe state. And if I have my state, that means I'm already logged in. I can do this.router.navigate to the Twitter component. Now, when my application loads up, it will initially fire an event, and it will check. And then every time later on, so once I've clicked on sign up, it will run this check again because the auth state will change. And then it will redirect as well. I need two functions here for sign up and login. Let me just quickly get those. So the login function takes the form that we defined, the form object we defined in the HTML, which gives us a email and password as strings. And all we have to do with that is then on the auth object, so this is the Firebase auth object, we call it sign in with credentials. And we pass in the form email and the form password. And that's about it for the login. And the sign up part is even shorter. We just create the call the create user with email and password, and it will do the trick for us. So there's one thing needed from our console side, and that's we need to configure the sign-in method. And over here, for this project, I've already enabled the email and password for this particular project. And you can see that there are many other ways that you can use, including Google, Facebook, Twitter, and GitHub. And you don't all you need to do is configure maybe the app ID or the API keys for this. Inside your code, you just need to call one function, and your whole auth flow is handled by Firebase. And this is effectively one of the more powerful things about Firebase authentication. So right now, we don't have any users. And let's go and sign up a user then. So I'm already running this. And we've compiled successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and create a test user. And when I click on sign up, whoops, something's gone wrong. Let's check what we have done. Oh, I never saved this file, sorry. So let it rebuild. This will reload, and then we'll run it again. And when I click on sign up, it's created a user on Firebase, and then it signed me in automatically. And I can check my user over here. There you go. This is the user I just created. And I'm logged in. So now whenever I try going back to the login page, it will simply redirect me to the Twitter component. Now, I will add that this is usually not how we implement authentication redirection. For that, we have something called auth guards. But at this point, we're just looking for a very quick and easy solution. So this works well for us. So that's done. We have the basic sign up and login working. We'll test out the login once we've implemented the logout function. We actually don't have that right now. So the next up, what we need to do is we need to wire up this Twitter component. So is everyone with me so far? Like, raise your hands if you are, if you're still awake. All right, I see a few hands. That's good. So effectively, what we've just done is we've added authentication to our app in, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes. So next up is wiring all the other features. So again, we'll start with HTML. We'll configure our bindings in Angular 2. And this is all going to look familiar now because we've already done this. We're going to call the logout function from the logout. Over here, we're going to create a variable called input. And when I click the Suite button, I can just say add, and I can send the input. I could send the input.value, but I also want to clear the input afterwards. So I'll just send in the input, and then I'll clear that inside my constructor. And over here, I want to make a few changes. So the first thing that's going to change is that when I'm using my Firebase store, the first thing that's going to change is that this items is an array right now. This is going to become an observable because Firebase, the AngularFire library, wraps everything up as observables. So I need to use something called a pipe to unwrap the observable into an array. So I'm going to use items pipe async. And that will just make sure whenever I get the data from my Firebase, it will just convert it into array and then give it to this ng4. Otherwise, it won't give it. And it won't throw errors for me. And over here, all that's left is essentially just I need to take all of these objects that I get. So these are going to be my each Suite object that I push. And I want to render them. So these are just now I'm just going to be doing template bindings. So I'm going to have items.user. And I'm using these specific properties right now because I've added some data here. So if I go under database, I can choose, there are two types of databases in Firebase right now. One's called the real-time database, and the other one is called the Firestore. So we're using the Cloud Firestore because that's the newer one, and it's an upgrade to the real-time database. It's not quite real-time, but it still does update as you go along. So in there, I've created a collection called Suites, and inside there, I just have like two data samples right now. And these are all the different properties I have. Now, it's important to note that this is not a schema. So I can have different objects with different properties. And for Firebase, that's not a problem, because this is a NoSQL database. So this is one of the other things that's useful, because when you're building experiments, you don't really know what the end product is going to look like. So instead of going and creating data schemas and then changing them again and again, all you have to do is just write up the code and then just run it, and usually just works all fine. So over here, I'm just going to wire up everything else. Item.text. Item.created@. And item.likes, right? I just have these things. And what I want to do is I also want to bind these buttons. I want to do, when I click this button, call the remove function with the item.id. And one other thing that I'll just add here, and this is just for visual stuff, that ngIf is a directive that is going to conditionally hide or show this button based on this condition that I'm going to write. So I want to say that my current logged in user.email should equal my item.user. This should only show if the current user is the same as the person who created this. And so this is a check that I'm putting on the front end, but you can have similar checks on the back end. We'll touch on that quickly at the end as well. So and over here, we have the same thing. We're going to do our click, and we're going to do the like function with two parameters, item.id and item.likes. So right now, we won't be checking if the person who has liked this before, if we're counting this or not. This button just increments the likes for now. So that's the HTML part, again. Fairly straightforward, very minimal changes. And then inside the Zwitter component, we can now start adding the code to link up everything. So as before, we'll start with the imports. And then we'll start adding the imports as services in our constructor. And for that, I have private router, private auth, AngularFire auth, and private DB, AngularFire store. So these are the three things that I need. Now I'm going to write some. I'm going to add some code that will actually fetch the data from the Firestore and then link it to the items variable that we used in our template. So effectively, you have this DB is our Firestore module, and we're just calling the collection function, and we defined a collection called Suite in our application. So we saw that over here. So this is a Suite collection that we're focusing on. And in order to get the data, all we have to do is call this function called snapshot changes. And this is, again, an observable. So we can then map on that. So this part of the code just does one thing. It extracts the ID from the key and puts it as part of the data. And that's because if you look over here, the ID is on a separate level. It's not with the data. So we need to make sure that we can access the ID in the data. Otherwise, we can't use it in our template. So I'm going to create some instance variables just so that I can get rid of the errors. collection, and then I want a user. That can be a Firebase.user. So, and now over here I have my redirection code that I had before. So in case my auth state changes, it's going to check if I actually am logged in. It's going to set the user as the local user. And if I'm not logged in, it will simply send me back to the login page, right? So that's it. Again, this will probably be better done as an auth guard, but for simplicity, we're just doing it over here. So now we have all the rest of the functionality that we need to cover. So let's just type it down really fast. We have the logout function. We have the add function. We have the remove function. Whoops. And we have the like function. So logout doesn't need any parameters. And all we need to do is call the logout function from the Firebase SDK. And that logs us out. We don't have to clear any local storage or reset our cookies or anything. That's all handled by the SDK. When we're doing add, it's as simple as just calling the add function on our collection. And I'm going to send in the object that I want to add. So over here, I was getting the input. And the input has the text, so input.value. I have my user, which is this.user.email. I have my created at, which is the date and time right now, and my likes, which I'll start with 0. I have my remove function that takes an ID as a string, and I can do this .collection .doc ID .delete. And that will effectively select that document in my Firebase and delete it. And finally, for likes, I had two things. I had the ID as a string, and I had the previous count as a number. And I'm essentially updating the object, right? So in this particular case, this.collection.doc ID.update likes is previous count plus 1. And that's it. I mean, there are no services to create. There's nothing else to do. You just call the functions. And since this is Angular, everything else is just going to work. It's going to update in the view accordingly. And we can go ahead and try it out now once we fix the errors. OK. I've probably made a typo there. Let's have a look. So it's supposed to be async, not async. All right. All right. So the data now, before we were seeing 5 static objects, but now what we're looking at is 2 objects that are coming directly from the database. And you can see that they're from different emails. So the one that belongs to my user, test.user, I can delete that. And the time and everything else is showing as well. So let me just go ahead and add a new one. If I click on this, I forgot to reset that. So I can quickly do that as well, just for clarity's sake. Input.value. And that will reset it as well. So when I click that, and it shows up instantaneously. And if I come up here, it's also going to get added over here. Now, because there are 2 things. Firstly, this is kind of a real-time database. And if other people are looking at this, it's going to update on their screens as well in real time. And the second part is that since this is using observables, I don't need to trigger any changes in my code to update the view. Whenever a new change comes in, it's given to the pipe, which unwraps it, gives it to Angular, and then it just re-renders the view accordingly. So effectively, I don't have to write too much code to have a very awesome real-time application really fast. I can delete. So I'm just going to delete my latest one. I click on this, and it's gone. And I can obviously do my likes, and all my likes are now working as well. So effectively, this is all working. I can click on logout and see if that's working. Yep, logout has logged me out. And then I can log back in using the user I created. And that's all working as well. So effectively, in about 20 minutes, we've kind of done this already. So next up is deploying this application to the cloud, right? So that everybody here can use it. And that's also very easy when it comes to using Firebase. So I need to install something called Firebase Tools, which I have already installed. And essentially, that's just npm install. Whoops, that's a bit too low. No, you can't see it. OK, that's fine. So effectively, npm install -g Firebase Tools is the command to install it. Once you've done that, you do Firebase login, which for me, I'm already logged in, so I don't need to do anything. In everybody else's cases, it's going to open a modal that you'll say accept, and you'll get logged in. After that, I need to do Firebase init, and that's essentially telling my application that I want to configure this, connect this to my Firebase. And I'm going to use the few functions that I'm using here. It's going to ask me to select my app. I've got a few apps running. I'm going to select the app. It's going to create a few files for me. It's asking me about my public directory, which in my case would be the dist folder. And it's asking me about whether this is a single page app. Since I'm using Angular, yes, that is. And that's it. I have configured my Firebase stuff in order to deploy it. Now, the next part is deploying it, and that's 2 steps. I first need to create that dist folder with all my code. And for that, I'm going to use something called ngbuild --prod. Actually, this is going to fail, so I'm just going to stop that, because I need to do one more thing before I do that. So we have 2 different configurations for our production, and so I just need to make sure that I copy the same configuration. So I could have a separate account for production, but in this case, I have the same, so I'm just copy pasting it over here. And now I'm going to do ngbuild --prod. And now this is, again, one of the cool parts about Angular. So I'm calling the Angular CLI function, and what I get in result is a fully optimized build from my front end. And for those of you who have used Webpack, you've heard of things like tree shaking and minimizing modules, extracting all the code that I don't need from different libraries and stuff. So this effectively does that. And this is going to create my build for me. So it usually takes a few seconds, and it's all going to throw it into a few files inside my dist folder. OK. All right, I think we're done. And the final step to deploying our application is Firebase deploy. And this will probably take a few more seconds. And until this is running, while this is running, we can have a look at something that's also interesting. And that's this file. So this is called the Firestore rules file. And one of the things that when we were working on the application, we didn't want users who hadn't created their own suites to delete other people's suite. So we added a condition in the front end that hides the button. But that's obviously not enough validation. That's just for the view. If we want to control that, we can do that using our rules over here. So effectively, all the requests coming into Firebase, they're matching all of the authentication rules in this file. And right now, the default is that I'm allowing all reads and writes to all the different applications that are trying to access it. So effectively, what I want to do here, I want to limit the rules here, and that will depend according to the application I'm trying to make. So I'm going to leave that like that for now. But effectively, if I wanted to say, let's say, add a specific rule for write, so I could say everybody can read it, but allow write if request.auth is not equal to null. And this would mean that I can only write if I'm a logged-in user. So if I wasn't a logged-in user, I wouldn't be able to write. So like this, you can write different kind of rules in order to make your application secure from the back end. So we can see here that our application has been deployed, and we can just go up here and just test it out really quickly. So this is now deployed live. You can actually go on that. Anybody can go on that URL, and they can access this application, and they can sign up, log in, and we'll use our test user that we created before. And if you log in, it's going in, and we're going to see all the suites that we created a few minutes ago. And effectively, that's all it takes to create an application and deploy it on the cloud. So that is effectively the power of Firebase. Cool. So that was a demo. And one final thing I'll add before wrapping up, and that is that another cool feature that we use is the Firebase Cloud Functions. And this is, again, where you guys have heard about AWS Lambda and stuff like that. This is like proper functions as a service thing, where you just write your scripts, and then you can make them available as endpoints, or you can make them just do specific things based on data changes in your database. So there's some built-in support of libraries, but you can effectively use any library in the Node.js, and it's going to package it up and ship it up online. So this is very useful for server-side custom scripts. And this is a fairly recent feature. It came a few months ago. And effectively, with this feature, now you don't really need your own server anymore. And that was pretty much it from my side. Thank you all for staying awake. And if you guys have any questions, yep, just fire them up. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. The URL? Yeah, sure. Hopefully it's readable. Yeah. And if you try tweeting, it's actually going to show up here because it's supposed to be real time. Yeah, so just be careful what you tweet, though. Yeah. Cool. Maybe can you do a QR code? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Do you want to do it over there?
Can you do which one for easy typing? Where it's a bit complicated.
Which part? Sorry.
The URL.
Oh, should I just
copy the URL, generate a QR code? So
oh, QR code. Sure. Let's try that actually. QR code. OK, so QR code generator. Will it work like that? Awesome.